Reports just in indicate that 2 army vehicles were blown up on Monday night on Colombia's Pan-American Highway. The UN has expressed concern over the suspension of municipal elections in the Dominican Republic. Suriname sees protests against the government of President Dési Bouterse. And Syrians began returning to their homes in western Aleppo after government forces regained full control of the city. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm Katrina Goss. We have reports just in on an explosion in Colombia. Reports indicate that 2 army vehicles were blown up with car bombs on Monday night on the Pan-American Highway near Barbados district, Rosas Municipality, Cauca department, with flames threatening several nearby homes. There is still no official confirmation of fatalities, but reports are of 5 people killed. Eri Kaneko, associate spokesperson for the UN Secretary-General, expressed concern over the suspension of municipal elections in the Dominican Republic on Sunday. Kaneko called for calm as the events surrounding the suspension are clarified after protests broke out against the decision. According to the president of the country's electoral body, Julio César Castaños, more than half of the electronic devices for the vote were not working properly, which led to the suspension. The electoral authorities announced that the elections will be rescheduled for March 15th and only use paper ballots. Just 3 months prior to presidential elections, the situation has been described as a blow to democracy. The Office of the Attorney General of the Republic demanded a technical report from the Central Electoral Board and the launch of an investigation into the matter. President Danilo Medina is scheduled to appear on television this evening and is expected to address the situation. And our correspondent in the Dominican Republic, Dési Bouterse, brings us more.
Hello, greetings. Yes, here in the Dominican Republic, a political crisis has emerged following the suspension of the municipal elections this Sunday, February 16th, due to irregularities in the process. This Monday, the Central Electoral Board called for new municipal elections on March 15th, and only paper ballots will be used. The automatic voting system will not be used in these elections, as the problem identified was with the automatic system, in which many of the candidates of opposition parties did not appear on the electronic ballot, resulting in protests in different neighborhoods, with reports of injuries and 2 people killed, as well as protests in front of the Central Electoral Board headquarters, calling for the resignation of the president of the board. This is all the information we have for now. Back to you in the studio.
A large group of protesters gathered outside Suriname's presidential palace in Paramaribo on Monday to demand an end to the government of the National Democratic Party and President Dési Bouterse. The protest started a week ago over increased fuel prices and living costs, as well as the unauthorized use of more than $100 million in commercial banking deposits by the Central Bank of Suriname. 4 people, including a trade union leader, were arrested in last week's protests. The unrest comes 3 months before Bouterse is up for re-election. The president was recently sentenced to 20 years in prison for the murder of 15 government opponents in 1982, but his attorney immediately appealed against the ruling. The president of El Salvador's Arena party, Gustavo López Davidson, has resigned in the face of legal proceedings against him. López announced his resignation on Monday to prevent the accusations levelled against him from staining the image of the Conservative Party. According to party rules, López will be succeeded by Vice President Eric Salguero. The resignation comes in the context of the political crisis in El Salvador, as the government of President Nayib Bukele battles with Congress for the approval of a loan to finance his plan to combat local gangs. The Mexican government has launched an investigation into police violence against student teachers and relatives of the missing Ayotzinapa 43 in Chiapas. Mexico's Interior Secretary Olga Sánchez insisted that an investigation into the events in Chiapas is necessary, as it may be used by opposition political parties to level accusations against the government. Sánchez spoke out against the attacks on protesters and in a tweet this Monday insisted that what happened in Chiapas demands a thorough investigation. She added that the local government should adopt all necessary measures to clarify the offence and punish those responsible. The official reiterated that the relatives of the Ayotzinapa mission student teachers have her full support. An estimated 8,000 people shut down a major part of downtown Toronto in solidarity with Indigenous communities who are protesting the construction of a natural gas pipeline in the north of Canada. Demonstrations over the past week have halted traffic in downtown Vancouver and shut down railways throughout the country. Indigenous chiefs and land defenders are fighting against the fracked gas pipeline that would cut through their territory in northern British Columbia. For more than a year, Royal Canadian Mounted Police raids on camps established by Indigenous people to protest construction of the pipeline have seen global headlines and inspired solidarity actions around the world. And in the context of the continued protests and disruption to rail services in Canada, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau cancelled a trip to Barbados scheduled for Monday. The decision came amid mounting pressure from business leaders and politicians demanding that the government take a more active role in resolving the crisis, which they claim is damaging the economy and could lead to shortages of propane and other consumer goods. Indigenous Services Minister Mark Miller met for over 9 hours with members of the Mohawk First Nation on Saturday. He noted that modest progress had been made in talks to end the main blockade near Belleville, Ontario, which led to the cancellation of rail services. The French Parliament this Monday began analysis and debate on the pension reform bill in the midst of ongoing protests against the move. The bill seeks to transform the current system of 42 different sector-specific pension schemes into a single scheme to apply to both state and private sector retirees. The bill of more than 60 articles establishes a controversial points-based system and a change to the minimum age requirement to receive a full pension. French trade unions have led protests calling for the bill to be scrapped, claiming it represents a major setback to workers' rights. The mobilisations were renewed this Monday as the parliamentary debate commenced.
Let me be very clear. I am 48 years old and I'm a precarious worker. I'm a musician and I know what I'm talking about. There are many wrong things in this country. We are dealing with a government that doesn't want to pay any attention to us and that is doing things only for a certain sector of the population.
And coming up after this break, the Venezuelan government has denounced serious breaches of aviation safety. Don't go away. Welcome back. The government of Venezuela denounced Portuguese airline TAP for several breaches of aviation safety on Flight 173 to Caracas, on which opposition lawmaker Juan Guaidó and his uncle Juan José Márquez travelled on February 11th. Venezuelan Transport Minister Hipólito Abreu listed among the irregularities the breach of passenger identification protocols, non-compliance with national and international security standards, and the transportation of prohibited material, after it was found that José Márquez was carrying explosive materials on the commercial flight. The Portuguese operator could face a fine or temporary or definitive suspension of its operating licence, in accordance with the result of the investigation being undertaken by Venezuelan aviation authorities.
We are calling upon some airlines to give us explanations as to why these events occurred. We will also instruct our officers of our Venezuela's National Institute of Civil Aviation to get in touch with Portuguese authorities so that we really evaluate whether this happened as part of a series of generalized irregular procedures or it was a specific event occurred on a particular flight and there was ill intent. There was evidence pointing to the fact that the passenger lists do not match. In particular, there was a citizen named Juan Guaidó identified with the name Antonio Márquez in violation of all international aviation general rules and regulations.
Structural violence continues to claim lives in Colombia. On Sunday, the murder of 2 people in an indigenous community of Cauca department was reported. The Indigenous Guard and local community are searching for the culprits. Sunday also saw the assassination of another member of an indigenous community in the same department. The Indigenous Leaders Association of North Cauca has stressed the critical humanitarian situation in the area, given the constant increase in assassinations and threats and a lack of response from the Colombian state. According to a poll released by Unitel television channel, Luis Arce, Bolivian presidential candidate of the movement towards socialism, is on course to win the elections of May 3rd, with 31.6% voting intention. Arce, who was economic minister under the government of former President Evo Morales, placed far ahead of former President Carlos Mesa, who has 17.1% support, and de facto President Janine Áñez with 16.5%, according to pollster Cies Mori. The poll, commissioned by El Debe newspaper and Unitel channel, surveyed around 2,200 people and was carried out between February 7th and 14th in the capitals of the 9 departments of the country. And continuing in Bolivia, residents of the city of Sacaba, Cochabamba, marked 3 months since the November 15 massacre of those protesting against the coup against former President Evo Morales. Families and residents gathered to mark the day when 9 men were killed by the military as residents staged a protest on the main road connecting the city of Cochabamba to Chapare province. Local leaders of the movement towards socialism attended the gathering as the victims were remembered as martyrs, killed in defence of Bolivian democracy by the de facto authorities. The community believes that justice will only come about if the movement towards socialism returns to power. The General Director of Chile's National Police Force, Mario Rosas, will be interrogated this week over the 30 complaints submitted against him, of which 21 are related to lawsuits filed for crimes against humanity. To these are added 9 lawsuits for crimes such as torture and unlawful coercion, in the context of the widespread anti-government protests and police repression in the country. Among the lawsuits are cases such as that of Mauricio Fredes, a protester who died from electrocution after falling into a construction pit while fleeing the police, and also that of Oscar Perez in a serious condition after being run over by police. Other cases relate to eye trauma and serious injuries to both children and adults. And it's carnival season in several countries in Latin America. In Uruguay, thousands are taking part in the longest carnival in the world. Let's take a look.
It's one of the most anticipated parades for all Uruguayans. Each February, tens of thousands of people participate in the parade where 50 groups of revelers present the colorful and distinct sound of 3 drums which identify the rhythm of candombe.
Candombe for Uruguay is almost everything. It's a popular movement where the black race is manifested, mixed with the white race and with the tourists. It means a lot for Uruguay. It's typical and the only place in the world where you are going to see it.
This year, the parade was organized as a tribute to Julio Sosa Canela, who died in December last year. He was one of the most famous figures of this carnival.
It's a tribute to Canela, a person who many years ago lived for candombe. He is a reference for all of us that has presented year after year. Unfortunately, he died recently, but today the celebration goes to that great man, a personality for our culture.
Candombe is recognized as an intangible world heritage by UNESCO. The rhythms are an inherited tradition rooted in the slavery era. The Africans brought as slaves passed on the knowledge and values of their rich culture, and in that process created the characteristic drums of candombe.
Today is like a mecca for all candombe players. It is the day when, after revelers prepare and rehearse weekly, they come together in this tradition. You will see and participate in a group of 70 revelers from the whole country. This is a national contest, and candombe today is how Uruguayans are many times recognized. Where there is an Uruguayan, there is candombe.
Until a few years ago, and before the increase in the amount of revelers looking to compete for the prize of best presentation, the official parade had been organized for 2 days. More than 2,000 drums and dozens of dancers walked along the Isla de las Flores street, the main street of the South and Palermo neighborhoods, to enjoy the carnival with candombe in their hearts.
And we're taking one last break now, but stay with us for more. Welcome back. Chinese health officials Monday urged patients who have recovered from the coronavirus to donate blood plasma to treat others who are critically ill. Speaking during a media briefing, Gua Yanghong, head of China's National Health Commission, explained that plasma from patients who have recovered from COVID-19 contains antibodies that can help reduce the virus load in critically ill patients. 11 patients at a hospital in Wuhan, the epicenter of the outbreak, received plasma infusions last week, according to Song Yang-wong of the Biological Center at the Ministry of Science and Technology. Updated figures show the death toll in China now stands at 1,772, while 10,844 patients have recovered.
There are still 10,000 acute patients and 10,000 cured patients under hope. Here we call for an action that thousands to donate blood plasma to save thousands of people. I hope more of them will extend their arms and donate their plasma.
The World Health Organization on Monday warned against blanket measures over the novel coronavirus outbreak, pointing out that the epidemic is only affecting a tiny proportion of the population outside of China.
This is a very serious outbreak and it has the potential to grow. But we need to balance that in terms of the number of people infected. Outside Hubei, this epidemic is affecting a very tiny proportion of people. So if we're going to disrupt every cruise ship in the world on the off chance that there might be some potential contact with some potential pathogen, then where do we stop? We shut down the buses around the world, and what happens when other countries are affected?
Syrians have begun returning to their homes in western Aleppo after government forces regained full control of the city. Syrian troops and allied forces backed by Russia regained control of both Aleppo and the surrounding areas for the first time since 2012. The latest advances come after government forces drove terrorist groups from the key M5 highway linking Aleppo to the capital of Damascus, thus reopening the fastest route between Syria's two biggest cities for the first time in years. And residents of the northwestern Syrian city of Aleppo gathered in the streets to celebrate the recent advances by the Syrian Arab Army. Social media footage showed jubilant residents waving national flags and chanting slogans supporting the forces and President Bashar al-Assad. US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo on Monday committed to supporting the fight against corruption in Angola as he met with President João Lourenço. Pompeo arrived in Angola on Sunday night from Senegal, where he started his Africa tour. During a speech, the Secretary of State said the Angolan government's mission to increase financial transparency and combat corruption would be incredibly difficult, but noted that the United States would support Angola in these efforts. Pompeo also commented on plans for a natural gas project in Angola, which could receive around $1 billion in funding. He claimed the project would benefit both American businesses and the Angolan people. After visiting Angola, Pompeo is set to head to Ethiopia, Africa's second most populous nation with more than 100 million inhabitants. On Friday, Mauritania opened a parliamentary inquiry into the regime of former President Mohamed Ould Abdel Aziz. The inquiry is linked to alleged corruption and mismanagement of the country's resources. Abdel Aziz ruled Mauritania for 10 years as its 8th president. He assumed power via a coup and later became a civilian ruler, winning 2 5-year terms in office.
The Commission is perfectly conscious of the need to undertake a professional and impartial work and commits to making every effort to shed objective light on this dossier, considering the national interest as its only motive.
Burundi's Truth and Reconciliation Commission has found more than 6,000 bodies in 6 mass graves in Karusi province, the largest discovery since the government launched a nationwide excavation process in January. Commission chairperson Pierre Claver told journalists on Friday that the remains of 6,032 victims, as well as thousands of bullets, were recovered from the graves. Clothes, glasses and rosaries were used to identify some of the bodies. Burundi's population is divided between the Tutsi and Hutu ethnic groups. Its civil war killed 300,000 people before it ended in 2005. So far, the Commission has identified more than 142,000 victims of the violence. South Sudan rebels on Sunday rejected a government peace offer to return to a system of 10 states, dashing hopes of ending a 6-year war that has claimed 380,000 lives. President Salva Kiir said he would compromise by cutting the current 32 regional states back down to the original 10, which was a key rebel demand, in order to pave the way for a unity government. But Kiir also included 3 administrative areas which were rejected by rebel chief Riek Machar. Machar warned the 3 areas risk causing further problems, describing the issue as a Pandora's box.
In 2015, Salva Kiir...
February 17th marks 9 years since former Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi was overthrown and killed by rebels supported by then US President Barack Obama, along with NATO allies. 9 years later, the people of Libya are yet to see the freedom and democracy that NATO promised them. The once prosperous nation was plunged into chaos and bloodshed as different warlords and militias vied for control of the country. Libya, once the centre of Pan-African unity, has become an open-air slave market, with black Africans sold for as little as $400. And we've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Katrina Goss. Thank you for watching.